Order, please. The draw for the late date debate tonight has taken place, and it was submitted by the honourable member for Cape Breton Nova. Therefore, be it resolved that this government show respect for those unfortunate enough to live in poverty on social assistance in this province by increasing their personal allowances by more than the meagre $4 per month they received effective October of this year. We will begin with the daily routine, presenting and reading of petitions. The Honourable, the member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a petition here that I'd like to present. It's on behalf of the residents of the Middle River Valley in Pictou County, and the operative clause reads as, whereas the Route 289 highway is the main link for the residents of the Middle River Valley, and whereas the bridge crossing the Middle River at Union Centre is in poor condition, and whereas the said bridge is restricted in weight, which negatively impacts its use by loaded trucks, thereby affecting the conduct of business. Therefore, we, the undersigned, request the government of the province of Nova Scotia to replace the bridge on Route 289 at Union Centre, Nova Scotia, as soon as possible. It is signed by 312 residents of the area, and I too have affixed my signature.
The petition is tabled. Here we go. The Honourable, the member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table the petition on behalf of the residents of Birchtown, Nova Scotia. The operative clause reads, residents of Birchtown are frustrated with the lack of high-speed internet access. We feel that it is time that we have this service made available to use, so we no longer have to spend time on the unreliable dial-up service. Mr. Speaker, there is 100+ names, and I have affixed my signature to the document.
The petition is tabled. The Honourable, the member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table the following petition, 32 signatures. My signature is attached. The operative clause being, we, the undersigned, would like to indicate to the Department of Transportation that a very dangerous intersection exists where the Croesus Settlement Road meets the 103 highway in Italy Cross. We would like to request that the 103 highway be changed so that it could cross the Croesus Settlement Road at a different location other than at the bottom of the hill where it now intersects. And my signature is affixed.
The petition is tabled. The Honourable, the member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition on behalf of 35 residents of the Stillwater Lake Hammonds Plains area. The operative phrase is that we are in favor of rezoning the Hammonds Plains Highway to allow home-based businesses on this section of the highway. I have affixed my signature, Mr. Speaker.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas many of our traditional resource industries are challenged because of the strong Canadian dollar, like the Christmas tree growers who are in the midst of their busiest weeks of sales here and around the world. And whereas as a government we are looking to our counterparts provincially and federally to help search for solutions to deal with the impact of the dollar strength on our exporters. And whereas regardless of the difficulties, including a decrease of exports to the U.S., the Christmas Tree Council of Nova Scotia says local prices for their quality product will not increase. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join Len Giffen, Executive Director for the Christmas Tree Council of Nova Scotia, in asking Nova Scotians to make a special effort to buy real Christmas trees produced in the province and show our support for our hard-working growers. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, hereby give notice on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Canada's most powerful women Top 100 list by Women's Executive Network recognizes leadership and achievements of women in the Canadian workplace. And whereas Chris Power, President and CEO of the Capital District Health Authority, was honored with the Public Sector Award given to women who occupy the most senior positions in the field and manage significant operating budgets. And whereas Ms. Power was only one of only 12 women recognized under this category. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating Ms. Power on this well-deserved award and thank her for her dedication and commitment to healthcare in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ron McDonald QC, a senior Crown Counsel of the Nova Scotia Public Prosecution Service, has distinguished himself as a prosecutor, legal educator, and volunteer both within his community and within his profession. And whereas the federal, provincial, territorial heads of prosecutions have recently awarded Mr. McDonald with that organization's 2007 Humanitarian Award, and whereas this prestigious national award honors and celebrates professional excellence and exemplary service both within the work environment and the community. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Mr. McDonald on his achievements and on the recognition he has brought to himself and to this province. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas woodlots, small and large, make substantial contributions to Nova Scotia's economy, its rural and urban communities, and its environmental values. And whereas the Nova Scotia Woodlot Owner of the Year Award recognizes and rewards residents who own between 50 and 2,000 acres and who practice outstanding stewardship and sustainable management of their woodlot. And whereas the Department of Natural Resources will be accepting nominations from across the province for this year's award until March the 31st, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge the importance of private woodland owners to the present and future of Nova Scotia and encourage the nomination of deserving woodland owners for the 2008 Woodlot Owner of the Year Award. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the last Monday in November is Dumping Day, as it is called, marking the beginning of the lobster fishery in southwestern Nova Scotia, and whereas lobster fishery areas 33-34 represent the largest inshore fishery in Canada, supporting 1,700 license holders, crews, and families, and making this lobster fishery significant to the local economy. And whereas the conditions of the sea in late fall and winter can be extreme in our part of the world, resulting in difficult working conditions on any given day for our fishermen, as seen by the delay of the start of the season for some fishermen in the Yarmouth area. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this legislature recognize the contributions of our lobster fishery make to the economy of Nova Scotia and wish them a safe and successful fishing season. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and if I could, I would like to do an introduction before the resolution.
Please do.
I would like to draw people's attention to the group of students who are behind me in the gallery, a group of students from Dartmouth High School who are here to get a tour of the legislature and to watch proceedings, so I'd like all of us to join in welcoming them to the House. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each year the highly respected The Scientist magazine seeks to identify the best place for scientists to work by ranking universities around the world, and whereas 83 universities were nominated and 8,000 scientists were polled by The Scientist magazine, and whereas a Nova Scotia university, Dalhousie University, was selected by this worldwide group of scientists, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House extend their congratulations to Dalhousie University for being chosen the best international place to work in academia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Scott Kane, known as Scotty to many, dedicated a large portion of his life to the Nova Scotia harness racing industry as an announcer, horse owner, industry promoter, and writer for more than 50 years. And whereas Scotty's gifted voice and love of the sport of harness racing led him to a career as a longtime announcer at Sackville Downs and the Truro Raceway. And whereas Mr. Kane recently passed away at the age of 66 after a lengthy illness, therefore be it resolved that all members of the legislature recognize Scotty for his lifetime contribution to the sport of harness racing and express condolences to his wife Judy, his 5 daughters, and their families. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister for Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas falls among older Nova Scotians are one of the leading causes of injury in Nova Scotia, and whereas falls among seniors cost Nova Scotians $72 million per year, and implementing falls prevention strategies and initiatives in our communities will ensure the sustainability of our provincial healthcare system. And whereas preventing falls is a priority of the province's injury prevention strategy, as well as among the Department of Health Promotion and Protection, Seniors and Health, and the Community Links Preventing Falls Together program, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the importance of the work being done by the various groups and individuals to prevent falls by seniors, as November 22nd was Seniors Falls Prevention Day. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister responsible for emergency management.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Emergency Management Office of Nova Scotia held its first public open house on October 30th, and whereas many of our emergency management partners provided command and response vehicles to help educate the public about our roles and duties in an emergency, and whereas those agencies included the Canadian Military, the RCMP, the Halifax Regional Police and Fire Services, Emergency Health Services, Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, Nova Scotia Ground Search and Rescue Association, and the Office of the Medical Examiner. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge the contribution made by each of these agencies to the success of their public education initiative. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in March of 2007, a devastating fire severely damaged the basement and main floor of the Spring Hill Public Library, resulting in the branch closure for repairs. And whereas the Nova Scotia Community College and the Dr. Carson and Marion Murray Community Centre helped out with drop-off and collection services, ensuring that Spring Hill residents still had access to their library materials after the fire. And whereas after 7 months of hard work by library staff, volunteers, and donors, the Spring Hill Public Library has reopened and continues to serve the community. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge the combined efforts of everyone involved in the reopening of the library and offer our congratulations and best wishes to the Cumberland Regional Library staff. I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister for Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the needs of the Department of Community Services clients are the first and foremost priority of the Department, and whereas Department of Community Services staff launched a complex integrated case management initiative in February and continue to adapt for the betterment of our clients, and whereas our ICM team was awarded a gold medal at a National Information, Technology, and Integrated Management Awards ceremony in October, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House commend the hard work case management staff do every day to help Nova Scotians achieve their full potential, and congratulate ICM staff specifically for an initiative not only appreciated by the Department of Community Services, but recognized countrywide for its innovation in improving service delivery. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I may, to do an introduction before I introduce the bill.
Please do.
Thank you very much, and I'll ask the individuals to rise to receive the warm welcome of the House. The Nova Scotia Dental Hygienists Association President Karen Wolf, the Chair of the Legislative Committee Sue McIntosh, some of the other legislative committees members Patricia Grant, I believe that's Diane Chalmers, and Terry Mitchell, as well as Marjorie Hickey, who is legal counsel for the association. As well, I'd like to Dennis Holland, who's sitting out back there. I know he's been working very hard from our department as well on this bill. So I would ask the individuals or the House to recognize these very, very dedicated individuals. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce an act respecting dental hygienists.
The Honourable Member begs leave to table a bill entitled An Act Respecting Dental Hygienists.
Bill 24, entitled An Act Respecting Dental Hygienists.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Member for Hants East.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Require the Government of Nova Scotia to Purchase Agricultural Products from Producers in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Require the Government of Nova Scotia to Purchase Agricultural Products from Producers in Nova Scotia.
Bill 25, entitled An Act to Require the Government of Nova Scotia to Purchase Agricultural Products from Producers in Nova Scotia.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act, to prohibit the burning of tires in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member begs leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act, to prohibit the burning of tires in Nova Scotia.
Bill 26, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act, to prohibit the burning of tires in Nova Scotia.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 208 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Hospitals Act.
Hey, we need it. The honourable member begs leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 208 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Hospitals Act.
Bill 27, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 208 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Hospitals Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting a Secretariat to Promote Nova Scotia as the Atlantic Gateway.
The honourable member begs leave to table a bill entitled An Act Respecting a Secretariat to Promote Nova Scotia as the Atlantic Gateway.
Bill 28, entitled An Act Respecting a Secretariat to Promote Nova Scotia as the Atlantic Gateway.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the 1992 Supplement of the Revised Statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
The honourable member begs leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1, 1992 Supplement of the Revised Statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
Bill 29, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1, 1992 Supplement of the Revised Statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to require the Minister of Health to establish a comprehensive province-wide palliative care program.
The honourable member begs leave to table a bill entitled An Act to require the Minister of Health to establish a comprehensive province-wide palliative care program.
Bill number 30, entitled An Act to require the Minister of Health to establish a comprehensive province-wide palliative care program.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 10 of the Acts of 1995 to 96, the Medical Act.
The honourable member begs leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 10 of the Acts of the 1995-96, the Medical Act.
Amend Chapter 10 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Medical Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby ask leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 1 of Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act, to prohibit levies, taxes, fees, or additional charges on recycled items.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act, to prohibit levies, taxes, fees, or additional charges on recyclable items.
Bill 32, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act, to prohibit levies, taxes, fees, or additional charges on recyclable items.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable, the official leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'd like to do some introductions before I read my
Please do.
resolutions. Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, joining us today in the gallery are members of the Halifax Rainmen. And I'm just going to read their names so that you can recognize them. Andre Livingston, who is the team owner and CEO. Rick Lewis, the Rainmen's head coach. Shannon Hansen, the assistant coach. Peter Benoit, the team captain. Blandon Ferguson. Eric Cruikshank. Brian Silverhorn. Dorico Wigington Downey, who is from North Preston and I might add was a star at Prince Andrew last year. Chad Eckelberger, James Boer, Jermaine Anderson, Kaderi Richard, Hardy Riley, Davino Williams, and Yad Sergonovich. Have I got that right? And please give them the welcome of the House. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia is and has been home to many top caliber sporting teams over the past number of years, and whereas the Halifax Rainmen have already weaved themselves into Halifax Regional Municipality through their community events and partnerships, giving back to their fans. And whereas in this, their inaugural season, the Rainmen are proving that each time they step onto the court, they give 100% to make Nova Scotians proud and are working hard to become positive role models for their fans, young and young at heart. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly welcome the Halifax Rainmen to Nova Scotia and wish them every success on the court and in our community for many years to come. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas more than 2 million Canadians have diabetes, and by the end of the decade, this number is expected to rise to 3 million. And whereas if left untreated or improperly managed, diabetes can result in a variety of complications, including heart disease, nerve damage, kidney disease, and eye disease. And whereas each year the Canadian Diabetes Association funds key research programs across Canada where critical work is done to help find a cure to this debilitating disease. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize November as Diabetes Awareness Month and commend the continued work by doctors and volunteers in their work to find a cure. I would ask for waiver of notice, Mr. Speaker.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Premier on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the House for giving me just a moment to introduce in the Speaker's gallery some very special guests, Mr. Speaker. As we all know, we all have our constituency assistants who do, I know, a fine job on behalf of us all, and we have a number of constituency assistants from this side of the House joining us here today. And I'd ask them to rise, Mr. Speaker, as I call their name: Diane Timmins, Victoria Lakes, Dale Keddy, Lunenburg, Madeline Rodenheiser, Bonnie Campbell, Colchester North, Barb Dobson, Guysborough Sheet Harbour, Karina McCaskill, Cape Breton North, Therese Boucher, Argyle, Valerie Shears, Eastern Shore, Joanne Williams, Eastern Shore, Jennifer Wadden, Pecto Centre, Margaret Embry, Bedford, Quentin Hill, Bedford, Wilana McDonald, Inverness. I might say that again, Mr. Speaker, Wilana McDonald, Inverness. Janice, Janice Proctor, she's extra important here today, Mr. Speaker. Janice Proctor, Antigonish, Jean Wadden, Cape Breton West, Judy Kelly, King South, June Mui, Kings South, Sandra Faulkner Truro, Bible Hill, Joanne Bond, Kings North, Karen Barclay, Cumberland South, Andrew Keddy, Chester St. Margaret's, and Ann Dillman of the beautiful Colchester, Muscataway Valley. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome.
The Honourable the Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I might, I'd like to add one more name to those introductions that the Premier's given.
Please.
I'd like to welcome Wayne MacDonald, the CA for the Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas heavy and torrential rain inflicted heavy damage on roads throughout Cape Breton on the first day of September going into the Labour Day weekend, and whereas the rain resulted in numerous washouts of roads in Victoria the Lakes, leaving some impassable, and whereas crews of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal were quickly on the scene of these devastated roads and through hard work soon had them passable once again, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly applaud the brilliant work of the employees of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal in both Victoria and Cape Breton counties for their dedication and determination in ensuring the safety of the motoring public and the residents of the area. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice, and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the annual Pictou Lobster Carnival, hosted each July, has recently been selected as one of this year's local secret big find for 2007 in Atlantic Canada by Travelocity.ca, and whereas thousands of folks travel to Pictou every year to enjoy the Lobster Carnival's music, boat races, lobster dinners, antique car show, Mardi Gras parade, and many other family activities. And whereas a new slate of officers was recently elected to prepare for the 2008 annual Lobster Carnival consisting of Chair Ann Emmett, Vice Chair Robin Dalton, Secretary Tammy Nicol, Treasurer Jennifer Buchanan, and Executive Officer Kent Corbett. Therefore, it be resolved that this House of Assembly commend all the volunteers for their hard work and dedication, helping to make the Pictou Lobster Carnival an increasing draw for tourists and locals alike, and wish the Pictou Lobster Carnival continued success for years to come. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lake Echo Lions Club is holding its 25th annual Seniors Christmas Dinner on Saturday, December the 1st at the Lake Echo Community Centre. And whereas over 200 seniors will attend this popular event, and seniors who are shut in will have their dinners delivered to their door. And whereas the Lake Echo Lions Club provides this dinner at no cost to the seniors and provide transportation to those that need it. Therefore, it be resolved the members of this House of Assembly recognize the Lake Echo Lions Club providing local seniors with a special Christmas celebration for the past 25 years and congratulate them on the continuing this important tradition. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas young New Glasgow native Sheila Coyne is a busy third-year student at Acadia University, and whereas Coyne was chosen as one of the 61 finalists to the second annual Generation B campaign, sponsored by clothing outlet Bootleggers, highlighting the achievements of outstanding youth in Canada, and whereas a 20-year-old has been responsible for organizing the Terry Fox Run at Acadia University, charity work for the Heart and Stroke Foundation, as examples respectively at both the university and in her hometown. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Sheila Coyne on her achievement and her enthusiasm for the community she is a part of and for being chosen as a representative of outstanding Canadian youth. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Counterminded? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each year polling is conducted in Canada on the most trusted professions, and whereas for the past several years nurses have ranked number 2 after firefighters as the most trusted professionals in our country, and whereas each and every day we entrust nurses with our care of ourselves and the people whom we love, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize that trust needs to be demonstrated in actions and not just words for our nurses and other healthcare professionals in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas since 1984, the National Quality Institute's Canada Awards for Excellence have been presented annually to private and public sector organizations with outstanding achievement in the areas of quality customer service and a healthy workplace, and where one of this year's recipients is the College of Registered Nurses of Nova Scotia. Whereas the College of Registered Nurses of Nova Scotia was presented with this honour at the 2007 Performance Excellence Summit Awards dinner on October 24th at the Metro Toronto Convention Centre. Therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate the College of Registered Nurses of Nova Scotia on being recognized for their vast achievements and wish the organization future success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Hants West.
I don't know why there's trouble with that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Public Service Commission is dedicated to building a service that strives for excellence while recruiting Nova Scotians to meet the needs of a modern and innovative public service. And whereas Paul M. Kendrick of Windsor recently retired from the Nova Scotia Public Service, shortly before being recognized for his 35 years of faithful, dedicated service. And whereas Paul, until his recent retirement, worked as a conservation officer with the Department of Natural Resources. Therefore be it resolved, all members of this legislature applaud the tremendous work ethic and commitment of Paul Kendrick of Windsor for his 35 years of dedicated public service. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Queens on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to draw the House's attention to the East Gallery. And with us today is Anne Cunningham with South Shore Health. And Anne is a dedicated healthcare worker. And as well, Anne is president of QP Local 1933. And if Anne could rise, I can't see her. I'm a little short on this side, but please give Anne a warm welcome.
The Honourable, the member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Queens County Seafest incorporates into its fun days in August a very successful fundraiser, the Cole Ford Row for Charity, which raised over $4,500 for charities in Queens County. And whereas 9 eager and able teams participated in the Cole Row for Charity event, which also incorporated participants selling tickets on a door prize. And whereas Cole Ford donated the money raised from these ticket sales to the Queens General Hospital Foundation, along with Exit Realty donating to the Hospital Hustle and PharmaSave donating to the Queens Fitness Center. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize Cole Ford of Queens County and fellow competitors for participating in the Cole Ford Row charity in Queens County and commend them on their fundraising efforts. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each November is recognized as Lung Cancer Awareness Month, and whereas Lung Cancer Canada is an organization whose aim is to increase awareness about lung cancer in Canada and provide support and educational resources to patients, their loved ones, and healthcare professionals. And whereas throughout November, the organization undertakes a campaign to provide information and materials to hospitals and treatment centres throughout the country, therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize November as Lung Cancer Awareness Month, acknowledge the tremendous efforts to create awareness of this disease, and commend those who fight to eliminate this form of cancer. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Ross Ferry crafters, through local emergency responders and healthcare providers, will bring a smile to the faces of children in time of need. And whereas the Ross Ferry crafters spent numerous hours this past summer creating handcrafted bears, which will be supplied to children in times of need. And whereas these bears will be given to children victimized by fires or disaster, or who are ill and simply need a hug and much needed support. Therefore be it resolved that members in this House of Assembly recognize the heartwarming project undertaken by the Ross Ferry crafters, applaud them for their tireless efforts, while recognizing even the smallest bear can make the biggest difference in a time of need. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Counterminded? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the lobster industry opening of District 33-34 in southwest Nova Scotia officially started on November the 26th, and whereas, as usual, the opening of District 33 from Sambro to Back Row Point officially started at 7 a.m. on November the 26th, and in a rare case, the District 34 Advisory Committee recommended to DFO to postpone their opening because of weather condition and safety concerns. And whereas the lobster industry is the economic engine in many coastal communities across southwest Nova Scotia, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the representative of LFA 34 and fishers from Back Row to Digby, along with the Department of Fisheries and Ocean, who chose to put safety first, and further request members of the House recognize the value of this industry and congratulate the lobster industry on putting safety first. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the status of health care in Nova Scotia should be listed as critical, and whereas Nova Scotians depend on emergency room services to be there when they most need, but due to shortages in doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, and others, a closed sign is hanging on the door. And whereas, as of November 24, 2007, emergency rooms have been closed for 5,809.5 hours so far this year, almost 2,000 hours more than last year. Therefore, be it resolved that the Premier and his new Conservative government commit to addressing the real problems with health care in this province and address the crisis facing ERs throughout our province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable the Member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Stellarton resident Stephanie Higgins recently returned home from the Dominican Republic, where she joined 29 other students from across North America as part of the International Student Volunteers. And whereas the Dalhousie University student said that she's forever changed after the enlightening experience where she witnessed poverty that most of the island's tourists never see from the luxury of their resorts. And whereas Ms. Higgins also came home with a restored faith in Nova Scotia and Canada and was proud to offer some of the children on the island gifts such as books, skipping ropes, and school supplies collected before she left for the Caribbean island. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send appreciation and praise to Stephanie Higgs of Stellarton for her ambassadorial work in the Dominican Republic, a country whose citizens are in need and require as much support as possible. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Pictou East.
Mr. Speaker, before taking in a resolution, I would like to beg leave to make an introduction. We have in the West Gallery a valued member of the NDP caucus who is here to witness the first, I believe, question period that she has attended, and her name is Kathy Rennick, and I would like to have Kathy stand and be recognized by the House. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Pictou County Seniors Festival is an annual 3-day social event attended by seniors from across the province to take part in information exchange, games and activities, and highlighted by a pork barbecue. And whereas the event is organized by a committee of hard-working and dedicated volunteers working with Recreation Coordinator Martin Bates. And whereas the Pictou County Seniors Festival has taken place every August for the past 19 years, with annual attendance reaching over 300. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly commend the dedication and enthusiasm of the volunteers and staff of the Pictou County Seniors Festival and wish the Pictou County Seniors Festival continuing growth and success in the coming years. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. Lisa Bonang is a family physician in Musquodoboit Harbour, and whereas Dr. Bonang leads a medical team of 5 at the Musquodoboit Harbour Medical Clinic and still has time to lecture at Dalhousie University. And whereas on October the 9th of this year, Dr. Bonang was named Nova Scotia's Family Physician of the Year. Therefore, it be resolved that members of this House Assembly congratulate Dr. Lisa Bonang on her accomplishment and being named Nova Scotia Family Physician of the Year, and wish her continued success in the future. I ask for waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Avonview Avalanche Senior High School girls rugby team are the 2007 Nova Scotia Provincial Champions, having won it with an astounding season record of 25 wins and 1 loss. And whereas besides the provincial championship, the Avalanche girls won the Western Zone regional title, the David Boy Memorial Tournament held in Prince Edward Island, their own Windsor tournament, and another held at West Kings District High School in Auburn, Kings County. And whereas the Avalanche head coach Jim Bryan faced the prospect of having his head shaved if his team captured the Nova Scotia Championship, and as a result of the provincial triumph, Bryan faced the Razors shortly thereafter. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Coach Jim Bryan and the 2007 Avonview Avalanche Girls High School rugby team for their strong dedication to commitment, their team spirit, and their Nova Scotia provincial title. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Digby is continuing to suffer from a health care crisis, and whereas without doctors, nurses, and nurse practitioners, many of our elderly residents of Digby are put at an unnecessary risk. And whereas, though just recently we have received an emergency room doctor at the Digby General, but we still have 6,000 patients in that area without a family doctor. Therefore, be it resolved that the Premier of this province and the Minister of Health commit to providing the health human resources necessary to provide for the residents of Digby and its surrounding area immediately. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable the Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas services provided by volunteers are essential for improved lifestyles, and whereas volunteers donate services valued in the millions of dollars each year, and whereas Amber Fitzgerald of Pleasantville, Lunenburg County, volunteered her services to communities in Nairobi, Kenya, and Elora, Ontario. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House congratulate Amber Fitzgerald for her kindness, caring, and donation of time and talents to help communities in Nairobi, Kenya, and Elora, Ontario through a Canada Youth, World Youth, Africa, Canada Eco-Leadership Exchange Program. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Counterminded. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas more than 50,000 strokes and 75,000 heart attacks occur every year, and 1 in 3 deaths in Canada are due to heart disease and stroke, and whereas in recent years the Heart and Stroke Foundation spent millions of dollars on research, funding research teams across Canada, and whereas the Heart and Stroke Foundation's tradition of funding world-class science means today's research climate is producing medical advances at a rate never imagined 50 years ago, therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize November as CPR Awareness Month and encourage the people of Nova Scotia to educate themselves on this vital procedure to saving lives. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas throughout 2007, Scouting marks its 100th anniversary in 155 countries around the world. And whereas on May 12, 2007, Scouts Canada held an award ceremony in Halifax to present the commemorative Centennial Medal to many outstanding volunteers who were integral parts of the Scouting movement in Nova Scotia. And whereas Ms. Jackie Jackard of Tuscott was a recipient of one of these awards for her hard work and dedication to the Scouting movement. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating Ms. Jackard and all other volunteers who have invested many hours, days, weeks, and years in the development of youth and Scouting in this province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Foster Paris, a resident of Truro, retired last April from Elections, Nova Scotia, where he faithfully assisted with the administration of elections for 3 decades and was Canada's longest-serving elections officer. Whereas Foster Paris joined Elections Nova Scotia staff in the spring of 1977 and was promoted to full-time that fall and became warehouse clerk in 1978. And whereas Foster Paris's first task was the 1978 election, and he would go on to help administer 8 other general elections, countless by-elections, and more than 25 liquor plebiscites. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House thank Foster Paris for his exceptional service to our province during his years at Elections Nova Scotia and wish him and his wife Sheila all the best in their future endeavors. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. Orders of the day. Oral questions put by members. It is 2:59. Question period shall go on till 3:59. The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me just start by saying it's good to be back. My question will be for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Premier is a fan of public-private partnerships, and you would know that the Ham government swore off the P3s because of the brutal financial losses taken by this province over the years. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have word that the Joseph Howe building, which cost this government some $50 million in rental costs over the years through the lease purchase agreement, will have to undergo $25 to $30 million in renovations. Mr. Speaker, this is a building currently assessed at $14.2 million. There is a report by CBCL on renovation costs. I'll table the cover page of the report, which says that it was completed on October 31st. And my question for the Premier is this: will the Premier agree to table the entire final report and all of the interim reports that led up to the final report?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do agree with my honourable colleague across the floor. It is great to be back here in the House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, where the people's business is done. Here, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate his question regarding Joe Howe building. As I understand, I believe that building is about 33 years old, so I can appreciate the age that it finds itself in at the present time. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, maybe we're both in need for a refit, I'm not sure. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, in all seriousness, Mr. Speaker, I can't speak to the report, Mr. Speaker. I have not had the opportunity to see such a report yet. But obviously, Mr. Speaker, the report in question was deemed necessary. It was deemed necessary because of the age of the building, because we need to ensure that our buildings are up to a particular code for our employees. We need to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that the conditions environmentally, the conditions from a working perspective are conducive to today's day and age, Mr. Speaker. And at such time as we can make the report available, we certainly will do that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a report paid for at public expense, Mr. Speaker, and it ought to be available to the people of Nova Scotia. This government's Joe Howe lease purchase deal has cost the taxpayers dearly and was part of the financial dealings by Conservative governments in the past that ran up the debt of this province, Mr. Speaker. Consultants were only brought in to examine the building after public servants, health department employees, said that their workplace was making them ill. Under the lease purchase agreement, the province will own the building in 2012. Despite that, the consultants discovered that the owners had not done the upgrades to meet today's standards. So my question to the Premier is this: is the lease purchase agreement so bad that the landlord can get away with letting the building run down before handing it to the province along with a bill for $30 million?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is correct. The current lease arrangement expires in 2012, Mr. Speaker. And obviously, when you take a look at perhaps at what has happened in our province and perhaps with many buildings here in HRM, Mr. Speaker, and government, lessons learned. Lessons learned, Mr. Speaker. And certainly this government will not be making the same mistakes.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lessons learned at the expense of the taxpayers of this province, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the disastrous P3 deals, the taxpayers of Nova Scotia have are faced with $25 to $30 million in a bill to fix up a building assessed at $14.2 million. And this, Mr. Speaker, is after paying some $50 million in rents over the years. So my question is this: will the Premier table a copy of the lease agreement that made possible this fiasco?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in my earlier answer, Mr. Speaker, the province of Nova Scotia, the government will take a look at the report, Mr. Speaker. We will make the relevant information available following that review, Mr. Speaker. But clearly, Mr. Speaker, what the official opposition is attempting to do is to cloud the issue, Mr. Speaker, because the government is moving forward on the opportunity of strategic infrastructure partnerships, which we see from one end of this country to the other, Mr. Speaker. The only ones that don't believe in the private sector in this province are those on that side of the House, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Let me agree. It's good to be back. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. At long last, we finally see the Conservative government's idea of a working families pharmacare program, and it leaves a lot to be desired. The Premier and his Minister of Health promised there would be no application fee, no upfront costs, no sign-up fee for this program. But a fee by any other name is still a fee. So my question to the Premier: why have you misled Nova Scotians about the real costs of the pharmacare program?
The Honourable the Premier.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, to my honourable colleague, Mr. Speaker, he is correct. There is no application fee.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Department of Health insists there is no premium to join, unlike the Seniors Pharmacare program, there is a 20% copay, and the deductibles are paid upfront as prescriptions are filled. Only after your deductible is paid will Nova Scotians begin to see the benefit of this program. Sounds like a premium to me. So my question to the Premier is, why has the department insisted on recovering their deductible upfront and instead of allowing it to be paid over the year?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we clearly outlined the objectives of the program, Mr. Speaker, yesterday, and we did that not only through staff but through the Minister and I. Mr. Speaker, the program is a very worthwhile program. We have 180,000 Nova Scotians who do not have a drug plan today, Mr. Speaker. This is meant to give them an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, an opportunity to not see them go forward in the upcoming years and not be able to afford many of the drugs that they require for them and their family, Mr. Speaker. That is the purpose and the intent of this program. It's about individuals, it's about people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is a cost to delivering any such program, and the province of Nova Scotia is investing heavily to make sure that this program is available to each and every Nova Scotian.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier tells us deductibles are based on family income. He says that families with the lowest income and the highest medical costs will benefit the most from this program. However, the Premier does not say who will benefit the most from this program are unable to cover the upfront costs. So my question to the Premier is, will this government eliminate the barriers and allow for a gradual payment of this deductible over the year?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as the program evolves, Mr. Speaker, we will give consideration to many things in the program, and certainly we will take my honourable colleagues' advice into consideration. We've already given that some consideration, and if we deem that it's possible to do that, we will. If not, Mr. Speaker, we will continue moving forward as we have announced.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is again for the Premier. The Joseph Howe Building is the headquarters for the Department of Health. In the event of an emergency, the people who work in that building may be called upon to provide important services. Yet the building has no backup power supply, and when a test was done on the backup generator this weekend, it burst into flames. So my question to the Premier is this: why did the government tolerate a lease purchase arrangement that can hinder this province's ability to respond to a public health emergency?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, through you to my honourable colleague, Mr. Speaker, it's the very reason, Mr. Speaker, why this government has put, Mr. Speaker, better roads and infrastructure as one of our top priorities for this province moving forward, Mr. Speaker. We want to ensure that our employees have safe workplaces. We want to make sure that they have quality workplaces, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, we are moving forward. We have moved forward in investments in many buildings, Mr. Speaker. And my colleague asked for the report, and we'll make sure that that is tabled as soon as possible.
The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the high costs that this government faces arising from the untendered P3 deal for the Joe Howe building, last night the Premier stood here and said that his government wants to sign more P3 lease purchase deals. My question to the Premier is this: are you now negotiating any agreement, or have you made any agreement with a developer for a lease purchase, or for any other arrangement where the province provides assurances of rental income to enable construction?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, well, if you include things like nursing homes, Mr. Speaker, obviously the answer would be yes to that, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Speaker, further to his previous question, we will be more than happy to make that lease available as well. And Mr. Speaker, with that, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to make sure, as we move forward with strategic infrastructure partnerships, Mr. Speaker, that we do the appropriate work that's required to ensure that the people of Nova Scotia are getting the very best bang for their dollar.
The Honourable the Leader of the Officials Opposition on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Joseph Howe building lease purchase arrangement will cost taxpayers $50 million in rent, and now there's a bill for as much as $30 million more that has been delivered through this report. It's the kind of financial irresponsibility that Conservative deals in the past rung up or piled up, Mr. Speaker, the province's $12 billion debt. And now the Premier wants to do it again. So my question to the Premier is this: what is it about the Joe Howe experience that has led him to the conclusion that Nova Scotia taxpayers can afford any more of these deals?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, obviously the Leader of the Opposition is against what every other province in this country is doing, Mr. Speaker, and that's making sure that they have partnerships which are working on behalf of their citizens. We as a province want to do the same. We already see this, Mr. Speaker. A good example is with our ambulance system here in Nova Scotia, the best ambulance system in the world right here in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, again, as I said before, the NDP, Mr. Speaker, are against the private sector in this province, Mr. Speaker. They want to nationalize the insurance system here in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
Order,
they want to
please.
drive investment away from our province.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Acting Minister of Finance. The previous government introduced P3 contracts that allowed private corporations to build schools and lease them back to the province. In trying but ultimately failing to keep the cost of these schools off the provincial books, that government spent over $30 million more than if the government had retained ownership. That's enough money to pay for a new high school in Eastern Passage, or to fix up many schools across the province and have plenty left over to pay for teachers and supplies. My question to the Acting Minister: why won't this government learn from the mistakes of the past and keep public schools in the public sector?
The Honourable the Acting Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, that this government indeed has learned and any arrangements that we will make in the future, Mr. Speaker, will not result in the kind of results the honourable member is suggesting.
The honourable member for Halifax Fairview on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, the private sector has always had a role in designing and building public schools in this province. It's not the private sector that we doubt. What we doubt is this government's ability to manage public-private partnerships in the public interest. They can't explain how they're going to avoid the P3 school fiasco of the previous government. They can't explain how they're going to avoid the P3 immigration fiasco, which is still unfolding. They can't explain how they're going to avoid the Joseph Howe building fiasco. Will the acting minister confirm? Will the acting minister confirm that it is this government's position that there is nothing wrong with public schools being owned by private for-profit corporations?
The Honourable, the Acting Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what I will confirm to the House is that this government will ensure that the necessary infrastructure that's required for the people of this province, whether it be in the field of education, in the field of healthcare, in the field of transportation, will be provided. And Mr. Speaker, we will draw upon the lessons of all jurisdictions in this country and elsewhere to ensure that we make the best arrangements possible for the people of this province.
The Honourable, the member for Halifax Fairview on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, he won't deny it. We all heard that he won't deny it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2000, Jane Purvis, the Conservative Minister of Education, said, quote, "Accounting reasons should not drive school construction decisions, educational reasons should." Her colleague, Neil LeBlanc, said at the time, quote, "We don't have to surrender ownership of our schools in order to finance and build them." My question to the Acting Minister of Finance: why has this government decided that it will let accounting reasons drive school construction decisions and that it will surrender ownership of our public schools?
The Honourable, the Acting Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm really surprised to hear the honourable member go to the accounting argument, because he's well versed, Mr. Speaker, in the concept of generally accepted accounting practices as are undertaken by this province. And those practices, Mr. Speaker, do not permit us to avoid any debt on our books as a result of strategic infrastructure partnerships. That is not the reason we're doing it. We're going to examine doing this in order to provide the very best service that we can to the people of this province, not to avoid debt, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. A working family of four making $33,000 per year is required to pay $750 in co-pay and deductible before receiving any benefits under the Conservative government's Working Families Pharmacare program. So my question to the Premier is, how is a family of four making $33,000 per year expected to come up with that $750 upfront cost?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't have the exact facts and figures in front of me, but if I do recall, a family of four, Mr. Speaker, making $27,000 would pay roughly $640, and the province of Nova Scotia would pick up the other $800 and some odd dollars, Mr. Speaker. Again, Mr. Speaker, we are providing a significant investment to ensure that these individuals, these families who are most needy in our province, are provided with the drug coverage that they need, Mr. Speaker. Surely the Leader of the Liberal Party is not suggesting, as was put forward by his party, is to do nothing for these individuals, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
A single mother of three young children making $15,000 a year is expected to pay a deductible and copay of $75. Well, this may not sound like a lot to you, Mr. Premier. It is a lot for a family trying to barely survive on $15,000 a year. So my question to you is, if this is a true family pharmacare program, why should any family making $15,000 a year be expected to pay any deductible?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the individuals who will most benefit from the program put forward yesterday are those who are most needy here in our province, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure we all agree with the fact that there's a cost to every program that we provide to the people of our province. As such, Mr. Speaker, we're making a significant investment. It will cost over $50 million to provide opportunities for our families who do not have drug coverage at the present time, Mr. Speaker. But we all have to pay into that program, and those who earn the fewest dollars in our province will have to put forward the fewest dollars, Mr. Speaker, and that's to ensure that they can provide the needed drugs for their family members.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many working families are struggling on a daily basis to make ends meet. This program, with its upfront cost, does very little to help alleviate the strain that these people face on a daily basis. The reality is, even with this program, prescription drug coverage remains out of reach for many Nova Scotians. So my question to the Premier is, how can you call this a working families pharmacare program when those who need it the most will not benefit?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the Nova Scotia Family Pharmacare Program will benefit every Nova Scotian. Mr. Speaker, every single person in this House today, every single Nova Scotian can sign up, and I encourage them to do so, Mr. Speaker. I do not want to see, and none of us want to see, individuals go without the drug coverage they need, Mr. Speaker. And for the first time, Mr. Speaker, in our province, we finally see a government willing to move forward for those 180,000 Nova Scotians who don't have drug coverage today.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is for the Premier also. In the speech from the throne, the Premier's New Nova Scotia was a place that has more general practitioners per capita than any other province. But despite the abundance of doctors, the Premier and his government still can't keep rural emergency rooms open because of a shortage of physicians, Mr. Speaker. Just yesterday, the Lillian Fraser Memorial Hospital in Tatamagouche closed its emergency room for the 22nd time this year, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Premier, why has his government failed to address an old problem like the crisis in rural emergency rooms, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I refer that to the Minister of Health.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can say to the member opposite that this will continue to happen from time to time. Yes, we have the best population per physician ratio of any province in Canada, and we will continue to work with those physicians to get them to work in more rural areas. Mr. Speaker, we are open 98% of the time in all ERs across this province. And Mr. Speaker, we have the best ambulance system in the world to make sure that they get to those ERs that are nearby.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, if the Minister of Health thinks 22 times is time to time, he's mistaken, and that's wrong, Mr. Speaker. The Lillian Fraser is not the only emergency room experiencing challenges. 3 emergency rooms in Cape Breton closed for a total of 7 times in November. Pugwash emergency room closed 7 times in October. Digby's emergency room scheduled to close twice in November. And the Shelburne Roseway emergency room is closed today, Mr. Speaker. The Premier and the Minister of Health have said in the past that they're taking action to resolve emergency closures, but the people in these communities know better, Mr. Speaker. So my question is to the Premier. How can he claim that there's been success staffing emergency rooms and recruitment of physicians when they're still closing as we speak, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable the Premier.
I refer that to the Minister of Health.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let's take Digby, for example. Digby, we have been successful in ascertaining another ER doctor. We have nurse practitioners going in there. So, Mr. Speaker, Digby Regional Hospital emergency room will be open. We continue to work on these one at a time. Mr. Speaker, 98% of the time, ERs are open in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier in his fall 2007 brochure stated, "What's new in Nova Scotia?" claims to have hired 55 rural doctors since January, 54 of whom, he said, settled in rural Nova Scotia. But we know that that's not the case, Mr. Speaker. The Health Department will tell you that only 31 rural doctors were hired, while another 15 left the practice during that time, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Premier today, can the Premier tell us whose facts are right? The government's pamphlet or the Department of Health?
The Honourable the Premier.
Refer that to the Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to stand and speak to the successes that we've had in physician recruitment in this province. Nova Scotia has more physicians per population than any other province. More Nova Scotians have a family physician than people in any other province. Our physicians do well compared to other doctors across the country. Again, we have the highest percentage of alternate payment plans among all provinces. 4 CAP candidates will begin practicing in rural communities in the next 60 days. Since 2005, 23 IMGs have been mentored under the CAP program and are working in our province. Mr. Speaker, we have great successes in this province.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. Howard Hyde lived with paranoid schizophrenia for most of his adult life. He was known to frequently go off his medication, and that's when he got into trouble with the law. Last Thursday, his condition worsened, and he became agitated and aggressive. His wife called for help after he assaulted her, and the police arrived. 30 hours later, he lay dead in a cell. Will the minister please tell us why Mr. Hyde wasn't treated as a mental health consumer rather than a criminal?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite full well knows, I cannot speak to the specifics of any case before this legislature. Mr. Speaker, very, very troubled by the incident that did happen. I know that the Minister of Justice, through his department, is reviewing exactly what happened here. Mr. Speaker, again, I cannot speak to the mental situation, nor the member's contact with the hospital system.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth East on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, there is ample evidence of Mr. Hyde's state of mind during that fateful night. His wife called the mental health mobile crisis unit and reported he was not taking his medication. Hyde was known to police after being tasered 2 years earlier, and he was twice arrested by the police and twice found not criminally responsible for his actions. My question is, given Mr. Hyde's condition and history of mental health challenges, why did nobody comply with the Involuntary Treatment Act in this case and get him the care that he needed?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, as I cannot speak to the specifics of any case, I know that it will continue to be reviewed, and I know that we will be sharing that information through the Department of Justice on this issue.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth East on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has said many times that this act would ensure mental health consumers would get treatment, not jail time. They said the criminal justice system was not the appropriate place for people who are mentally ill. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the minister why he did not keep his promise to Howard Hyde.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I said, we'll continue to review this particular case to make sure that we will not see a similar outcome. Mr. Speaker, I will continue to work through the Department of Justice and the Honourable Minister. And Mr. Speaker, we continue to implement the Involuntary Psychiatric Treatment Act, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, was not supported by the NDP.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. So far this year, we have over 5,800 hours of emergency room closures across the province, almost 2,000 hours more than last year, and almost 3 times as many hours as the year before. Digby General has seen 3 times as many closures this year over last year. Cape Breton District Health Authority has seen more than twice as many closures as last year and accounts for more than half of all closures across the 9 DHAs. The emergency room at New Waterford has been closed an astounding 9 times more this year. So my question to the Premier is, what is the Conservative government's plan to stop this outrageous increase in ER closures?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Health answered in the previous question, there are a number of steps which the government is taking, Mr. Speaker, to keep our ERs open, Mr. Speaker. From time to time, we do see challenges with that. But, Mr. Speaker, over 98% of the time, these ERs are open, Mr. Speaker, and I feel very confident in the abilities of our healthcare workers, Mr. Speaker, who are doing a fine job to ensure the safety and the quality of healthcare provided to our citizens that they deserve.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has repeatedly tried to convince Nova Scotians that we are ahead of the game by having the highest patient-to-doctor ratio in the country. But no other province is suffering from the same outrageous ER closures. In fact, our Atlantic neighbours rarely, if ever, have any ER closures. So my question to the Premier is, why can the other Atlantic provinces maintain ERs and we can't?
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I refer that to the Minister of Health.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we need to understand exactly what's happening. And I know the member opposite mentioned some of the ERs that are closed from time to time. Mr. Speaker, I'd already referenced in a previous answer our solution to what's happening in Digby, and I thank the member for Digby Annapolis for his support on bringing this issue forward and finding solutions. Mr. Speaker, I can also say that in different parts of the province there are different issues. Mr. Speaker, the issue in, of course, Glace Bay and New Waterford is the issue of nurses. And Mr. Speaker, I can say that we have had the opportunity of training more nurses. Well, maybe Glace Bay, maybe not New Waterford. And we've been working we have over 500 new nurses in the last 5 years, and we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to expand seats at the Dalhousie Medical School. And Mr. Speaker, the member opposite refers to other provinces, and they did something that we are not going to do, which is close rural ERs.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his final supplementary.
They say where there's a will, there's a way. Certainly applies to the current crisis when it comes to our ER closures. The new Conservative government has been offered help time and again with ER docs who themselves said they would help manage the ER crisis in this province. But the minister has refused that offer. It is clear that there's a lack of political will to fix this problem. So my question to the minister is this government preparing Nova Scotian for the ultimate, which is the closures of some ERs across this province?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It seems like I answered his last question, the last answer. Mr. Speaker, it is not our intention to close ERs. It is our intention to find solutions to keep those rural ERs open.
The Honourable the Member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is for the Minister of Justice, and it concerns the governance standards for the use of tasers by police forces in this province. Mr. Speaker, last week, in the wake of the tragic events in British Columbia, but before the unfortunate death of Mr. Hyde in Dartmouth, the Minister reassured Nova Scotians that a governance standard outlining appropriate use of tasers is in place for law enforcement agencies here. Can the Minister tell the House what those governance standards are, and more importantly, how long they've been in effect?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the Honourable Member for Timberlea Prospect brings up something that is top of mind to all Nova Scotians, in fact, all Canadians. And that's why we acted so promptly to cooperate and part of the coordination and collaboration across Canada right now. And yes, we have a policy in place. I'll be happy to present a copy to the Honourable Member what that is. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll be happy to disclose that. And more importantly, we have a ministerial review. Indeed, for Nova Scotia, we're undertaking, and we'll be announcing the details of that as part of our ongoing efforts of cooperation with this matter.
The honourable member for Timberley Prospect on his first supplementary.
The question was, how long have they been in effect? But I will move on to this. Police governance standards for the province of Nova Scotia were circulated on December 12th, 2006. However, those standards contain no timelines for implementation and no obligation for police forces to report back on this implementation. So my question is, how then did the minister know on the 20th of November that governance standards were in place for law enforcement agencies in this province?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's simple, because that's my job, honourable member.
The Honourable the member for Timberley Prospect on his final supplementary.
Well, on November 22nd, following the tragic death of Mr. Hyde, the minister announced this review of policies and procedures and protocols regarding the use of tasers in Nova Scotia. So my final question to the Minister of Justice, will this eminent review also include a review of the action or lack of action by your predecessor as the Minister of Justice on this issue in this province?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, this government has been very responsible and takes this matter very seriously. And if the member wants to politicize this, then let's have an open debate in this House with regards to that, Mr. Speaker. But I can tell the honourable member and all members of this House that this government will continue to be responsible in our management and actions and the policies and procedures as set out, and we will hold that course and stay the course for responsible use in this province.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. In May 2004, the former Minister of Health stood in this House and told Nova Scotians that palliative care is a priority. Quote, "We are in the process of establishing a standard approach across this province, finding the best services that we can provide. It is a priority with respect to moving forward." End of quote. A detailed report recommending a province-wide single point of entry palliative care program was authored by the Department of Health in June 2005. So my question is, when is the province going to implement their own recommendations and bring forward a province-wide comprehensive palliative care program?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And there have been steps taken with regards to the palliative care initiative, Mr. Speaker, and I would refer to the Minister of Health to update my honourable colleague.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the member opposite knows, that all Nova Scotians who need end-of-life care should have access to the same level of service regardless of where they live in this province. And I can say that over the last number of years, we've been working steadily to equal out the system as it's going. Mr. Speaker, I can say that we have been working on hiring a coordinator to manage palliative care in this province, and we'll continue along this project.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My first supplementary is to the Minister of Health. The statistics are available and staggering. 80% of the people want to die at home, and yet 70% are forced to die in hospital. The palliative care services that are available are often only delivered between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. The only saving grace to this cruel reality is that the cost of medication is covered while in hospital, while they are not when a patient chooses to live his or her final days at home. So my question to the Minister is, what does the Minister have to say to those suffering Nova Scotians who are being forced to spend their final days without proper palliative care?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In all due respect to the member opposite, medications are covered for those life-ending days. Mr. Speaker, we are making sure that those individuals have more home care entitlements when they come into a palliative state. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to expand those services through the continuing care strategy.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department continues to announce piecemeal Band-Aid solutions to the problem which is existing in palliative care program across this province. All the while, their own report and recommendations sit on a shelf collecting dust. So my question to the Minister is, the Department has already done their homework, the plan is available, when will the Conservative government implement their own work?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I said to an answer previously, is that we'll continue to expand the services as dollars do come available to make sure that we are doing it correctly and equitably across the province. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to expand this very, very important program.
The Honourable the member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 decades, Shelburne County has been hit by major job losses. We have experienced the closure of government facilities, including 2 military bases in Back Row and Sandy Point. The people of Shelburne County have seen the loss of the school for boys, and now we are dealing with the downturn in the cod fishery. All of these closures have impacted severely on the lives of the people of Shelburne County. My first question to the Minister is, when is he going to focus resources on revitalizing this part of rural Nova Scotia?
Good question. Good question.
The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have indeed been working very closely with the municipalities in Shelburne County. We've worked very closely with the Southwest Development Authority in that part of the province, Mr. Speaker, and finding ways to improve the level of economic activity in Shelburne is a priority of this government, as well as the Southwest Development Authority and the municipalities in the area, and we'll continue to work with them.
The Honourable the member for Shelburne on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Nova Scotia government created the RDAs to help to generate economic development and the growth in rural communities like Shelburne County. In my writing, the Southwest Regional Development Authority has been tasked with the sale of the boys' school and the Sandy Point Sound Stage. The proceeds of those sales will go to the 5 municipal regions of Shelburne County to fund economic development work. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister of Economic Development how he will ensure that these sales are completed in a transparent manner to ensure the 5 municipalities will have a development fund.
Good question.
The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And of course, what we want to do is to ensure that the funds to which the honourable member refers are indeed dedicated to economic development activity.
The Honourable the member for Shelburne on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents of Shelburne County signed a petition this summer requesting a comprehensive audit of SWOSTER handling of the sale of the Sandy Point Soundstage and the boys' school. So far, this request has not been dealt with by this government.
Why not?
Mr. Speaker, my final question to the Minister of Economic Development is, when will he ensure the audit so that the money from these sales can direct for the betterment of the people of Shelburne County?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I indicated in the answers to the previous question, that is our objective is to ensure that all of these monies go toward economic development. And the honourable member knows that the Southwest Development Authority has representatives from municipal council on that authority, and they are, of course, very much in tune with what is happening, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. Over 81,000 individuals, including 19,000 children, are living in poverty in this province. The department is engaging in a consultation that has left a lot of those Nova Scotians out of the process, particularly those struggling on low income. Organizations were told that these First Voice people could attend the November 1st and 2nd meetings, but only if they were substituted as that group's participant. My question to the Minister, when will her consultation on poverty have fully public, open participation?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for the question. Raises a very important issue, Mr. Speaker, that we're extremely pleased to be moving forward on. Mr. Speaker, the issue of poverty is one that is complex, does not belong to a single department, Mr. Speaker, nor does it belong to a single group. That's why my honourable colleague, the Minister of Environment and Labour, and I have co-headed this poverty consultation. We will continue to work with stakeholders across this province, Mr. Speaker, from one end to the other, to ensure that a multi-year poverty reduction strategy is in place as committed by our Premier, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth North on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Community Services Committee held 2 poverty forums, and anyone who attended could participate. Recommendations on reducing the impact of poverty were brought forward based on input from dozens of groups and individuals. A poverty reduction strategy done properly is a positive thing, but measures could be put into place today while this process continues. My question to the Minister: why not listen to the advice of poverty groups now and improve on policies so Nova Scotians get immediate help?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government, indeed our departments, take very seriously the issue of poverty, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have over 70 programs throughout government today that address the very serious issue of poverty, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some of the phenomenal work that was done by many members of this House during the Standing Committee for Community Services on their poverty forum, Mr. Speaker, has been incorporated into the analysis that we're doing, Mr. Speaker. We believe it's important to consult, Mr. Speaker. If memory serves me correctly, some members on the other side didn't think we should consult, Mr. Speaker. I believe we should consult, and we should ask Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, while it's consulting on poverty, the department has changed its policies to make access to community services pharmacare more difficult. It has also cut off clients getting special need items, or they have had to get approval over again, paying unnecessary costs for doctors' letters and medical forms. My question to the Minister is: why is her government talking poverty reduction out of one side of its mouth and making life harder for Nova Scotians from the other?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government, under the leadership of our Premier, takes very seriously the issue of poverty, Mr. Speaker. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we continue to invest daily in the quality care of all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to do that as committed, Mr. Speaker, for many years to come.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. In December 2005, ministers of health from across the country met on patient wait time guarantees and came up with wait time benchmarks. At that meeting, the ministers agreed that wait times on hip replacement surgery would be decreased to 26 weeks. The ministers further agreed that all provinces would have detailed action plans on how they were going to achieve those goals by the end of 2007. So my question to the minister: does your department have a detailed action plan to reduce wait times to 26 weeks that they agreed to, and when will they reach it?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, over the last number of years, ministers of health, including myself and previous ministers, have been working hard to work with the Department of Health and surgeons and hospitals to reduce wait times. Mr. Speaker, I was very happy to attend an announcement by Dow Surgery, or the QE2 Surgery, Department of Surgery, and they have some real stuff that can make true differences. And Mr. Speaker, that's where the issue has to come from those individuals who actually do the surgeries. We can provide dollars, we can provide oversight, but until it comes to physicians, it really can't happen. So I'm very, very pleased with their work.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada has the worst wait times of any G8 nation. Nova Scotia has some of the highest wait times for several procedures in the country, including joint replacement surgery. Only Saskatchewan has a longer wait list than we do. Alberta is performing hip replacement surgeries within 3 months of specialist referral. Recently, Dow Surgery, the IWK, and Capital Health released their own report on wait times for surgical services, including possible alternatives and solutions to this ever-increasing problem. So my question to the Minister: Does this Conservative government have a plan to reduce wait times for all procedures, or are they going to let the doctors and DHAs figure this out on their own?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to provide policy. We can continue to provide dollars. We will continue to provide as much oversight as we possibly can. But, Mr. Speaker, it has to happen on the ground. It has to happen with physicians. It has to happen with electronic data systems. It has to happen on the ground, and it is that is finally happening. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to be part of that system.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party, on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Conservative government received $64 million from the former Liberal federal government to be spent in reducing wait times in this province. While some wait times have been reduced, it has been at the expense of others which continue to grow. Yet there is money still in the Wait Times Reduction Fund sitting idle, unused, in a government bank account, while Nova Scotians suffer in silence waiting for medical services. So my final question to the Minister is, when and how is this government going to spend the balance of this Wait Times Reduction Fund?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I know the department staff and through my offices are looking at other projects that can make a difference in wait times. And, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly why in our throne speech that we have identified wait times as one of our 5 priorities. And we will continue to work with all individuals within our healthcare system to make sure that wait times become better.
The Honourable, the Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, Council has one of the region's best multi-species fish processing and storage facilities. The community also has a talented and eager workforce that is now jobless. Workers watch shrimp and other species landed in Council being trucked to Newfoundland and elsewhere for processing. This is despite an understanding by the federal and provincial governments that Council deserves a supply of fish to be processed in that plant. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister what he's doing to support Council's case for processing in the community.
The Honourable, the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the honourable member is speaking about an issue that is of great significance for that part of Nova Scotia. It's been a real challenge for them since the closure of the fishery and the unavailable species to bring to Council. That's a problem that's been a real challenge, especially for the current owner and operator of the plant that's there. I've met with Mr. Barry and had a very detailed discussion with respect to the future of that plant. And I can say, Mr. Speaker, that in consultation with the Minister of Fisheries, who is also the MLA for the area, we are prepared to work very closely with the community and with all who are interested. And Mr. Speaker, as some who are interested in that area develop their plans even further, we will be able to move forward. But I don't want to create any great expectations, Mr. Speaker. The challenge is very, very significant.
The Honourable, the Member for Pictou East, on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, once processed in Newfoundland, shrimp has been trucked back to Council for storage to a large freezing facility paid for in part by Nova Scotia taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, the reason Nova Scotia taxpayers have subsidized that freezer was to keep fish processing jobs in Council. Instead, greenhouse gas emissions have been increased in order to send unprocessed species to fish plants in Newfoundland and elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Minister, how does this situation fit into his government's Buy Local campaign?
The Honourable, the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to tell the honourable member that whatever solutions we're able to find for Council are solutions that have to make sense both from the perspective of the operator that would work in Canso and, of course, for the community. But, Mr. Speaker, there first of all has to be a supply of species available, and that needs to be able to be processed at that plant in a very competitive way, because there's no point in an operator going there, and in fact an operator will not go there if they're going to see that they'll lose money into the future, Mr. Speaker. So that's why I say that the challenge is very significant of finding somebody that can indeed operate in that facility and operate in such a way that people can look forward to a sustained operation in the future, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, many species are being trucked out of Canso. Mr. Speaker, without the tax revenues brought in from the sea freeze plant, the town of Canso may not be able to sustain itself in the long term. Townspeople have been forced to travel to PEI and elsewhere to work just to get enough hours, or to try to get enough hours to claim unemployment benefits. In August, the Premier toured Canso and said he'd see what your department could do. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Minister for Economic Development, what is your department going to do?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, by the very tone of the honourable member's question, he doesn't understand what is required for a solution. The only solution that he intimates toward, Mr. Speaker, is that the department have the solution. The department will have a solution working with the private sector, Mr. Speaker. That's the only long-term viable solution, unless, of course, they're advocating public ownership of that facility, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Natural Resources. On October 12th this year, the Minister announced a forestry transition program consisting of some $36 million. And one part of this program is the government picking up the tab for silviculture through 08-09. And when the registered buyers were paying 2/3 of the cost, it resulted for the most part in even-age treatments to maximize production of softwood fiber. But really, Mr. Speaker, for this to be a transition plan, we have to do something that will actually result in a transition. So, Mr. Speaker, my question, with the taxpayer footing the whole bill for silviculture, why are we spending all of this money on a model of forestry that is not working and is not sustainable?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for bringing up the forestry sector. This is one of the leading components of the Nova Scotia economy. It employs roughly 16,000 people. And for some time, Mr. Speaker, we have been hearing from the whole sector and everybody that depends on the sector for assistance. And Mr. Speaker, within the confines of the softwood lumber agreement, we feel that we have responded to their legitimate concerns. We wanted to make sure we did nothing to compromise their access to the American market. And Mr. Speaker, the industry tells me they are pleased with our plan.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Pictou West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Association of Sustainable Forestry's 2-year program to promote Category 7 treatments has already had 1/2 of its funds requested. The funds for uneven age stand management should not be allowed to run out. The pickup on the program shows that woodlot owners are interested in environmentally responsible forestry, and with training and guidance, interest will grow. So my question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, to help in the transition of our forests, will the Minister ensure that a much larger portion of the silvicultural funds will go to the sustainable Category 7 treatments?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm a little surprised by the member's question, because I thought that he would possibly be aware that we in fact did specifically target $570,000 specifically for Category 7 and an education plan. It was done in consultation through the Minister's Forestry Technical Advisory Committee, and has the support of all stakeholders.
The Honourable the Member for Pictou West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. $570,000 is only a very small portion of the $36 million that's been given here to the forest industry. I was aware of that, but it's really just a drop in the bucket. So, Mr. Speaker, I think any transition program has to involve a plan, a true plan to get long-term value for our forests. Many smaller woodlot and forestry operations involve small and medium-sized family businesses that lack the needed resources for effective market research and development. So my question to the Minister, of that $36 million, what proportion is going to be used to really investigate the value-added potential for Nova Scotia's forest industry at this time?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that the member opposite is not happy with the plan. In a news release he put out, he says the pulp fiber industry is an important one, but Mr. Speaker, the pulp fiber industry is a major employer in Pictou West, and I'm surprised that he is not supportive of this program, and I would table this, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order. The time allotted for oral question period has elapsed. Government business. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
No justice.
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
No justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just on a point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition asked during question period of the Premier to table the report in regards to the Department of Transportation and Public Works at the time for the condition assessment and recapitalization of the Joe Howe building. I'd like to table that at this time, please.